All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is the Release Management Overview presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm John Skarbek. I work on the delivery team, and I'm going to give a short overview as to what a monthly release looks like for a release manager. Please keep in mind that this presentation is not going to encompass everything Release Manager does because there's quite a few. Today we're going to target a couple of specific things. Also keep in mind that processes change very quickly in our environment. What I say today and what's inside this slide deck may not be up to date if you're looking at this in the future, so just keep that in mind. So today we're going to do an overview of the timeline of the release procedure. Specifically, I'm going to use the example of releasing 11.8, which is a monthly release or a minor release that we do for GitLab. And secondly, we're going to cover a wide array of the tooling that we use. So I've got a lot of diagrams. These are, for the presentation purposes, I've split up the diagrams into smaller chunks. That way it's easier to present. I've got a link to the actual diagrams at the end of this presentation for looking at in the future. So let's get started. First up is our timeline. So there's a few things that we do in related to our branches that we need to ensure that we keep a stable pace on. So one of the projects we have is called a merge train. So we have two code bases.
Can I interrupt you for a sec?
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing your screen?
Oh my goodness.
Don't worry about it. Just share your screen and
good start.
I think you did a good start. Now you're gonna make it better.
You can see my screen now, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Take two. So there's a few things that we accomplish as part of our process of ensuring that we have stable branches along the way as we do a release. So step one is, we've got two code bases, GitLab CE for the Community Edition, GitLab EE Enterprise Edition. We want to make sure that any changes that go into CE actually make it into the Enterprise Edition. So we have a merge train on a cadence of every 20 minutes. It will run and take any changes and merge those into the EE branch. The second thing is something that a release manager does currently in a manual process. It will take a release manager will take a snapshot at a current point in time and manually make changes of the master branch into a stable branch that has been created when the process of doing a monthly release starts. Yes. From a development perspective, from as close as possible to the previous month release, the 22nd, we will, anyone will be working, or excuse me, rather, from minus infinity in time, an engineer will be working on the feature development for 11.8 in this example, and that will continue all the way up until the 7th, which is our feature freeze date. Between the feature freeze date of the 7th and the 22nd of our release, anything that makes it into that 11.8 release is going to be specific to anything that has been considered releasable and any bug fixes or security regressions that we need to fix during that period of time. If any feature work was developed but didn't make it into that release, it will get delayed into 11.9, or we have a exception request that we have engineers fill out in case we need to bring something in at the last second. From a release manager's standpoint, there's a few things that we do throughout the month. The first thing that we do, however, is create an issue that helps us track where we are as far as status for that issue or for that release. So in this case, we'll create an issue called 11.8. This will stay open. We open this as close as possible to this 22nd of the previous month, and it will stay open all the way through until that release has made it out the door. This issue is a large set of tasks that we run through, that we check as we roll through the process to help us keep track of where we are in the progress. One of the first items that we accomplish during a release is start the release candidate. This happens shortly before the 7th. We try to target that week before the 7th. This allows us to take the large amount of changes that happen and get it to a testable state. So we'll create the release issue, which again is just another issue that's full of checkboxes that we need to run through. Later on, when we get to the appropriate step, we'll tag that issue or tag that release, which will kick off a build in one of our projects. That build, if successful, will kick off a deploy to our staging environment automatically. Assuming that deploy was successful, we will then create a QA task. This is an issue, again, in which we tag all of our engineers and all of the change, and we make a comment about all the changes that made it into this release candidate. The point here is that we want developers to come in, log into the staging environment, and confirm that their changes work as desired. If not, we expect that bugs to be created and issues to be worked on as necessary, that we can bring those changes into future release candidates. The QA task is a issue that usually stays open for the first 24 hours for the first release candidate. Any release candidate after that, this issue will usually stay open for roughly 24 hours or 12 hours. Assuming that we haven't received anything from any engineers saying that we need to stop the release and bail and proceed with another one, we'll deploy to Canary. And if we'll start monitoring, production a little bit, we got some dashboards and some error monitoring that we'll keep track of. And if things continue to look okay, we'll proceed to deploy to production. And if that goes well, we'll publish these packages, which will allow the public to install RC1 if they choose. At this point, as soon as that's done, we'll repeat the process and we'll start working on release candidate 2. Release candidates are created pretty much only if we need them. We want to create as many as we feasibly can as a way to test the minimum amount of changes possible as we progress through the month. The company has a goal to publish on the 22nd of every month, so we want to make sure that everything has been fully vetted out and tested as the month has progressed. In my example, we've made it up to RC11 in my pretty diagram. I think realistically, when we released 11.8, we made it to RC8 before we published the official 11.8 version. Hypothetically, there will be no code changes between the last RC that was created and what gets published to the public. The only difference being what version we have inside of that package. So instead of 11.8.0-RC11, it would simply be 11.8.0. So at this point, I will stop and ask if anyone has any questions before I continue. Okay.
There are no questions. I would like to make an observation that I just noticed. And I know, Skarbek, we practiced this, but I missed it completely. So on slide 5, if you go to slide 5, the timeline shows that feature development goes from infinity to the 7th, and then there's a feature freeze, and then 11.9 feature development continues. Actually, 11.9 feature development starts on the date of the feature freeze of 11.8, which means that the right side need to align with the reddish column there. So just an item to clear up here.
Excellent. I'll make sure I make those changes in the future.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll move on to the tooling. Again, this is, for the purposes of the presentation, I've taken a larger diagram and carved out chunks of it. So again, I'll have the link at the end for everyone. So the first tool I want to mention is ChatOps. This is a company-wide tool. Everyone uses it. It's just a simple bot that sits inside of Slack that everyone could talk to as necessary. It listens to a lot of commands, but here in this diagram, I've highlighted a couple of the important ones that the release managers will utilize. RMs will primarily use ChatOps as a gateway into our release tools project, which is where the majority of our tooling actually happens. So we have a large set of rate tasks inside of release tools, takes in a couple of variables and performs a bunch of actions for us. A lot of this, we kick off all of these issues mainly for the time being. There are tasks that we want to automate in the future, It's simply a work in progress to make it better for everyone. Release tasks. This is simply a location where we have all of the issues that I mentioned beforehand to push them in a place where people have visibility into where we are as far as status goes for the release during the month. So release 11.8.0 is going to be just the large task list that release managers follow for the entire release process of that. 11.8.0 RC1, well, there's a typo. This is going to be specific to that very release candidate. And then 11.8.0 RC1 QA tasks. This is that, for the very first one, it's going to be that large list of tasks that tags all of our engineers that we want people to check off and make sure things are working in the staging environment before we can continue. Omnibus-GITLab is one of our larger projects. This one has an amazing looking CI pipeline. The responsibility for Omnibus-GITLab is to build things. It will reach out to the necessary projects to bring in all the versions that we desire. So it will reach out to all of the GitLab subcomponents, as well as projects that we include, such as Postgres or Prometheus, and bring in the specified versions that we need. So as inputs to Omnibus-GITLab are going to be like branches or tags that we use, and those kick off the necessary builds. The outputs from Omnibus-GITLab are primarily going to be our build artifacts. So the RPM packages, the Debian packages, and the Docker images. There's a few aspects to Omnibus-GITLab. One, we have our nightly builds for both nightly CE and EE. For both of these, we build all of our packages. We just don't publish all of them. Nightly EE will publish only the Ubuntu 16.04 Debian package. That way it can be later installed via our dev and ops instance on a nightly cadence. I believe they have cron jobs for those. Whenever we are ready to perform a release of some sort, we'll tag our build. So in my example here, we're tagging 11.8.0 plus CE or EE. Those will kick off the necessary builds, which starts to build our packages. We will only publish our Ubuntu package to a temporary location that we could use to automatically kick off a build to our staging environment. And then we hold off on the publishing of all of our other packages until we are ready. We have a specific command that when we are ready to release that package, it'll go into these pipelines and trigger the manual steps to publish those packages for public consumption. Okay. Deployer, this is a project that it's pretty self-explanatory. GitLab Omnibus will trigger a deploy into our staging environment automatically anytime GitLab EE is built. We utilize chat ops to trigger deploys to the Canary production environments using Deployer. Deployers a set of Ansible playbooks, and it uses CI that's held on our ops instance for running all the operations. And the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit of how we segregate our security work a tad bit. So we have our two repositories for GitLab CE and GitLab EE, but they live in two different locations. So we have these repos are both in our gitlab.com for the public, and we also have a set of repos on our dev instance. The process and the way people work is pretty much the same. It's just if it's a security specific issue, for example, when we released 11.8.1, for example, all of that work happens on our dev instance. This just provides a location where we could do the work in a private location. That way we're not leaking information prior to us having a release that gets published to the outside world. Okay, and this finishes up my presentation. Again, here's a few links to the various pieces of documentation and diagrams that are located inside of this presentation. So if anyone has any questions, I'll take them now.
Skarbek, maybe it's worth just sharing the final, like the whole overview, the whole graph. Just share the screen to show, like everyone now saw the small pieces and arrows coming in,
Yeah.
But maybe it's just worth quickly giving an overview of how it looks, how messy it looks.
It's quite messy, but yeah, I could share that. Give me a second.
Sure.
So this is, if you're seeing my screen still, this is the full chart as is. There are a couple of typos and a couple of arrows that are not entirely correct, but chat ops is our gateway to release tools. And release tools does quite a few things. So if we wanted to follow one of these as an example, like let's take our monthly issue that gets started. So we'll issue the chat ops command release issue 1180. This will kick off a rake task called monthly issue, taking the appropriate variables in. And that rake task does a few things. So one, it creates a branch in all the necessary projects. So we'll get a 11.8 stable branch, an 11.8 stable EE branch is necessary, and the same thing for omnibus-gitlab. And then one of the other things it'll do is create a release inside of the release tasks project. It will create our monthly issue that has a large set of checklists for us to go through. Marin, is there anything else I should?
I would like to hear if there are any questions. I think someone wanted to speak up.
This is Jerry. So first of all, thank you for this, because this clears a lot of the cloudiness in my head of all the stuff that goes on. My question is more meta than any specific stuff. Is there, or are you working on the moral equivalent of this presentation for what things will look like in a few months?
Not
rather, will you work on it at some point?
Yeah, in the future when we get things sorted out. I know we've got quite a few merge requests out there for design doc as to how we want things to progress in the future. Marin has also got the desire to do some sort of regular training, and I think we may take advantage of having the ability to, as we make changes, host more presentations like this in the future as changes happen, because these will be very important as certain changes impact the larger community as dev work progresses overall in general.
Yeah, totally agreed. I mean, but the reason why I'm asking is, there's, in order to make these changes, there's obviously all the work that's happening in delivery that you are doing. But then there is also all this communication that I'm trying to over communicate these changes, because they will affect a large part of the GitLab population. And so I just want to make sure, on the one hand, that we can show the effects of this work and how some of this is going to get simplified. But on the other hand, it's just good for me to be able to, say, walk into engineering, the Eric staff meeting, and being able to share some of this at that level so that they get visibility into what's coming. But this is fantastic.
That totally makes sense, Jerry. I think we definitely have plans to present this. We only want to try to remove some of the manual items that we are doing now, and remove some of the boxes that you see on the screen right now, because that's taking significant chunk of our time. So remove the manual stuff before we can, go proudly to YouTube and show, like, look how great of our pipelines look, and then get trashed.
Oh, but even the intermediate removals are super valuable, right? So some of these boxes get
snapshots. Like in a month, if we remove some of these boxes, just do another one of these where we explain.
Right.
Okay.
Right, because I mean, we want to make sure that people are aware that progress is happening. And I know that the things that I'm saying are more on my wheelhouse than anyone else's, but it's good to be able to show this progress. I think this is fodder for obviously presentations at conferences, for instance. And it certainly is stuff that I want to be able to share at Eric's level. To give you an example, I know that there are some board members that highly interested in how we move and when we move to CI/CD. So just being able to over communicate this is good because these will affect the company as a whole. So
totally makes sense. And I guess I can put it on my task list to do a snapshot before. So we didn't do it when we started with the team. We had too many other issues to take care of, but I can actually do a similar presentation with a similar graph to just show one step back before we introduced chatbots, before we introduced all of these automation. By the way, this is improved situation for anyone who's wondering. This is a way, way better than what we had before. So I can actually do a presentation of how it looked throughout 2018, and we can then compare.
Awesome. This looks fantastic. I'm very excited.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Skarbek.
Have a good one.
You too.